Have you ever heard a sound so haunting it sent chills down your spine? A wail so piercing it felt like a warning from another world? That's the cry of the Banshee, a ghostly figure woven into the heart of Celtic folklore, her voice carrying whispers of fate itself. Tonight, we step into the mist-shrouded hills of Ireland and Scotland, where the Banshee's legend has clung to the land for centuries. She's more than just a story. She's a harbinger, a mourner, a mystery that blurs the line between the living and the dead. And her tale is waiting to unfold. Picture this: you're walking alone on a moonlit path when the air suddenly grows still. Then it comes a sorrowful wail, high and unearthly, echoing through the trees. Your blood runs cold because in that moment you know what it means. The Banshee has spoken. For generations, her cry has been feared as an omen of death, a signal that someone's time is near. But where did this belief begin? Is she a vengeful spirit, a grieving ghost, or something far older, something buried deep in the land's ancient memory? The answers lie tangled in centuries of myth, superstition, and the raw, untamed folklore of the Celtic people. This isn't just a ghost story. The Banshee's legend is a mirror held up to human fears, to our deepest dread of the unknown and our fascination with what waits beyond life's edge. She's been called the Banshee, the fairy woman, a spirit tied to noble families, her wail a mournful gift rather than a curse. But her story shifts with the telling, sometimes a beautiful, sorrowful figure, other times a grotesque spectre with hollow eyes. Why does her image change? What secrets does her history hold? Together, we'll trace her footsteps through time, from whispered village tales to the pages of modern horror. By the end, you'll never hear the wind the same way again. So light a candle, keep your ears open, and let's unravel the mystery of the Banshee. The night is listening. A Banshee isn't just any ghost, she's a figure carved from the very soul of Celtic myth. A spectral woman whose voice carries the weight of destiny. In Irish folklore, she's known as the Banshee, or Woman of the Fairy Mounds, a spirit bound to certain families, her mournful cry echoing through the night as a warning that death is near. Imagine her, draped in tattered grey robes, her long, silver hair streaming like mist, her face pale as moonlight. Sometimes she appears young and beautiful, a sorrowful maiden cloaked in grief. Other tales paint her as a hunched crone, her eyes hollow, her mouth twisted into an eternal scream. But no matter her form, her purpose remains the same: to keen for the dying, a sound so piercing it chills the bone. What sets the Banshee apart from other death omens? Unlike the grim reaper who arrives to claim souls, or the wailing ghosts of Japanese folklore, the Banshee doesn't cause death, she announces it. Her wail is a lament, a dirge sung for those about to pass, a tradition rooted in the ancient Celtic practice of keening, where women would wail over the dead to guide their spirits. This ties her to something deeper than fear, a cultural reverence for the threshold between life and death. Yet the Banshee isn't alone in her role. Across the world, spirits whisper of mortality. In Mexico, La Llorona's weeping haunts rivers, her grief a warning. In Scotland, the nighe washes blood-stained shrouds by streams, her presence marking doomed souls. But while these spirits often bring terror, the Banshee straddles a stranger line. She's feared, yes, but also oddly respected. Her cry isn't a curse, it's a farewell, a final act of mourning for those she watches over. That duality, her role as both omen and mourner, makes her legend linger not just in stories but in the very air of the Celtic twilight. The word Banshee itself holds the key to understanding her eerie nature. It's an anglicized twist on the Irish Banshee, meaning woman of the fairy mounds. Break it down and you'll find Bean for woman and she for those mystical fairy hills dotting the Irish landscape, those ancient burial sites where the veil between worlds is said to thin. But language, like folklore, is never static. Cross into Scotland and she becomes the Banshee, the fairy woman who lingers by lonely streams, her voice weaving through the highland mist. These regional variations aren't just dialect quirks, they're clues to how deeply her legend is rooted in the land itself. Dig deeper into that word she, and things get even more intriguing. It's tied to the old Irish Cid, meaning peace or otherworld, a realm of eternal youth and magic in Celtic myth. So the Banshee isn't just a ghost, she's a bridge to that hidden world, a messenger from the places we can't see. Even her title shifts across Ireland. In some tales, she's the Badb, named after the war goddess Bodibi, who shrieked over battlefields like a crow. In others, she's the Bean Caointe, the keening woman whose cries echo the old funeral rites. Every name tells a story, revealing how cultures grappled with the unknown, whether framing her as a fairy, a phantom, or a force of nature. Listen closely to these linguistic threads, and you'll notice something astonishing. While the Banshee's image shifts, sometimes a sorrowful beauty, other times a terrifying hag, the core of her name stays stubbornly tied to the supernatural feminine. That's no accident. In a world where women were the mourners, the keepers of death rites, her voice becomes a cultural echo, a reminder of the power and mystery long associated with the feminine in Celtic tradition. So when her wail cuts through the night, it's not just a warning, it's a fragment of ancient language surviving in whispers, still humming with the old magic of the she. Long before Christianity swept across Ireland, the land hummed with older beliefs that saw spirits in the rustling leaves, voices in the wind, and doors to unseen worlds hidden in the very hills themselves. This was the world that birthed the Banshee. To understand her, we must step back into pre-Christian Celtic traditions, where the line between the living and the dead was porous, where the otherworld wasn't just a distant myth but a presence as real as the soil underfoot. The Celts didn't just believe in spirits, they lived alongside them, negotiating with them, fearing and honoring them in equal measure. Central to this world, you were the fairy folk, the owls she, beings who dwelled in the mounds and hollows of the land. These weren't the tiny, winged sprites of later tales, they were powerful, capricious, and deeply tied to the natural world. The Banshee emerged from this tradition, a spirit linked to specific families, her wail a thread connecting the mortal realm to the Shia, the fairy mounds where the otherworld leaked through. She wasn't just a ghost, she was part of a broader cosmology, a world where death wasn't an end but a crossing, and where certain spirits acted as guides. Animism shaped everything. Rivers, trees, stones, all held a kind of life, a sacredness that demanded respect. The Banshee's cry, then, wasn't just a random omen. It was part of a larger conversation between the seen and unseen. Some scholars suggest her origins may even tie to territorial spirits, guardians of ancestral lands who signaled when a rightful heir was about to join them in death. Others see echoes of the Morrigan, the crow-headed war goddess who shrieked over battlefields, her voice a harbinger of doom. The Banshee inherited this liminal role, standing at the threshold, her voice both a warning and a lament. What's fascinating is how these early beliefs refused to die, even as Christianity took root. The Banshee survived, her legend bending but not breaking, her fairy origins blending with newer notions of purgatory and restless souls. That resilience speaks volumes. She wasn't just a story. She was and is a reflection of something deep in the human psyche, a need to give voice to the mystery of death, to hear it coming, and to know we're not entirely alone when it does. So when the wind howls just right, or a strange cry echoes in the night, remember, you're hearing the whispers of a world much older than our own. To truly grasp the Banshee's place in the tapestry of Celtic myth, we must venture further back, to the Tuatha Dé Danann, the godlike race said to have ruled Ireland before the arrival of mortals. These weren't just mythical figures, they were beings of immense power, skilled in magic, artistry, and war, their name translating to the people of the goddess Danu. Legend claims they retreated into the otherworld, becoming the owl's she, the fairy folk who still linger in the hollow hills and misty glens, and it's here, in this shadowy lineage, that the banshees' roots may lie. Some tales suggest banshees are descendants of the Tuatha Dé Danann, their mournful wails carrying the weight of a fallen dynasty. Others paint them as faithful servants, tasked with watching over ancient bloodlines, families who once held kinship or favor with these divine rulers. Picture a noble house tracing its ancestry back to the Tuatha Dé, their fortunes intertwined with the old gods. When death comes for one of their own, the banshee appears, her cry a final honor, a nod to that ancient pact between mortals and the she. But the connection runs deeper than mere service. The Tuatha Dé Danann were masters of transformation, shifting between beauty and horror, just as the banshee flickers between a radiant maiden and a hollow-eyed hag. Consider the Morrigan, the shape-shifting war goddess who could appear as a crow or a stunning woman, her screams on the battlefield chillingly similar to the banshee's keening. Even the Dagda, the fatherly figure of the Tuatha Dé, had a harp that could summon seasons and emotions with its music, much like the banshee's voice commands grief itself. What's haunting is how these threads weave together. The banshee isn't just a ghost, she's a living fragment of Ireland's oldest myths, a whisper of the Tuatha Dé's lingering influence. Her presence blurs the line between history and legend, reminding us that in Celtic tradition, the past never truly fades. It watches, waits, and wails when the time is right. So the next time you hear a mournful wind, ask yourself, is it just the air moving or the echo of gods who never left? Not all banshees wail for just anyone. Some are bound by blood, tied to specific families like spectral guardians of lineage. These personal banshees, often called family attendants, were said to serve ancient Gaelic dynasties, their cries reserved only for those of noble birth. Picture the great houses of Ireland, the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the MacCarthys, each with their own otherworldly mourner, her voice a grim birthright passed down through generations. Historians whisper that the O'Donnell clan's banshee was even named Abe Hill, a ghostly figure draped in green who haunted the rocky shores of Donegal, her keening echoing before the death of any O'Donnell chieftain. These weren't random phantoms, they were part of the family's identity as much as their crest or their land. But then there are the wanderers, the banshees who serve no single house, whose wails pierce the night for anyone fated to die. These general banshees lack the aristocratic ties of their counterparts, appearing instead as omens for entire communities. Some say they linger near battlefields, their cries rising with the smoke of the slain. Others claim they're drawn to places of sudden death, lonely crossroads, treacherous cliffs, the bends of rivers where drownings occur. Unlike the family banshees, whose loyalty is absolute, these spirits are untethered, their warnings impersonal yet no less chilling. The divide between these two types reveals something profound about Celtic society. Family banshees mirrored the rigid hierarchies of medieval Ireland, where ancestry dictated destiny. To have a banshee was a mark of prestige, a macabre proof of one's ancient lineage. Meanwhile, general banshees reflected the collective fears of ordinary folk, the understanding that death comes for all, noble or not. Yet both share one haunting trait: their cries are never threats, only announcements. Whether bound to a castle or a cottage, the banshee doesn't bring death. She merely bears witness, her voice a bridge between the living and whatever waits beyond. Dig into the records and you'll find eerie consistency in the tales. The O'Neill banshee was said to comb her long silver hair with a golden comb, a detail repeated across centuries. The O'Brien spirit reportedly appeared as a shrouded figure clutching a handkerchief stained with blood. These specifics weren't just flourishes, they were identifiers, ways for families to recognize their ancestral mourner. It's as if the banshee's form became part of the family lore, her appearance as documented as their genealogy. Contrast that with the general banshee, whose descriptions vary wildly. a young woman weeping by a stream, a skeletal hag rattling chains, even a mist with a voice. Without a family to anchor her, she shifts to fit the fears of whoever hears her. That fluidity makes her more unpredictable and in some ways more terrifying. Because while a noble might take grim comfort in knowing their banshee's face, the common folk could only listen in the dark, wondering whose death the wind carried on its breath. What's striking is how these legends endured even as the old Gaelic order crumbled. After centuries of English rule, many noble families lost their lands, their power, but not, it seems, their banshees. Stories persist of these spirits appearing to descendants scattered across the globe, as if the bond transcends time and distance. A Mac Loud in Canada reportedly heard the family wail days before his father's passing. A modern-day O'Connor in Australia claimed to recognize the banshee's cry from stories told at his grandmother's knee. Whether truth or tradition, one thing is clear: the banshee's tie to bloodlines isn't easily broken. So why do some families merit a personal mourner while others share omens with the masses? Folklore suggests it's tied to the ancient contracts between mortals and the owl's she, the fairy folk. Families of high status may have forged pacts offering reverence in exchange for the she's protection, or at least their warning. The general banshee, then, becomes a free agent answering to no one, serving only the balance between life and death itself. Together, these two roles paint a fuller picture of the banshee's world, one where the past never fully releases its grip, and where every wail, whether for a king or a farmer, carries the weight of centuries. That unearthly scream, the banshee's signature, isn't just any sound. It's a phenomenon that defies ordinary noise, a vibration that seems to crawl under the skin. Descriptions vary, but one thread remains constant. It's a cry that doesn't belong to this world. Some say it starts as a low moan, rising into a piercing shriek that splits the night. Others insist it's a continuous, mournful keen, like the guttural sobbing of a woman in unbearable grief. There are reports of it echoing as if carried by the wind, fading in and out, while some witnesses swear it came from inches away, clear as a bell, though no figure stood nearby. The sound isn't random. Folklore insists it follows patterns: 3 wails in succession, or a series of broken sobs that mimic the rhythm of traditional Irish keening, the ceremonial weeping for the dead. This wasn't just mourning, it was a language. In some accounts, the pitch itself held meaning. A high, clear note signaled the passing of a child, while a deeper, resonant wail warned of an elder's departure. But one thing's certain: those who have heard it rarely forget. A 19th-century chronicle from County Clare tells of a farmer who described it as the sound of 2 rocks grinding together but shaped into a voice. Another, from a soldier's diary in the 1700s, claimed it was like a scream caught in a bottle, muffled yet endless. Let's dispel a stubborn myth: the banshee doesn't kill. Her wail isn't a curse but a herald, a supernatural courtesy call. Ancient tales are adamant she merely foreshadows what's already fated. The confusion might stem from her association with the Morrigan, the war goddess whose screams on battlefields were said to paralyze men with dread. But the banshee, she's a mourner, not a murderer. When her voice cracks through the silence, it's not because she's chosen a victim. It's because the thread of a life has already been cut, and she's there to mark the moment. Historical records offer chilling glimpses. In 1824, a London newspaper reprinted a letter from a traveller in Kerry who swore an entire village heard the banshees cry the night before a local chieftain drowned in a storm. The account details how the sound seemed to come from the cliffs, as though the rocks themselves were weeping. Even skepticism falters when faced with the sheer volume of testimonies. A physician's journal from 1692 documents a noblewoman's feverish account of being woken by a woman's voice, wailing in Gaelic words I couldn't understand, only to learn her brother had died at sea at that exact hour. Yet not all encounters are tragic. Some folklore insists the banshee's wail can be gentle, a soft humming, almost a lullaby for those destined to pass peacefully in sleep. It's this duality that makes her legend so enduring. She isn't just a harbinger of doom, she's a guardian of transition, her voice the last earthly sound some souls will hear. So the next time the wind carries an odd cry, ask yourself, is it just an animal, a trick of the air, or something far older, tuning the night to a frequency only the dying can fully understand? Travel across Ireland, and you'll find the Banshee's legend shifts with the landscape, her appearance, her behavior, even her name morphing to fit the fears and folklore of each region. In the rolling green hills of Munster, she's often described as a vision of eerie beauty, a young woman with flowing red or silver hair, clad in a gauzy white gown, her face pale but serene. Here, her wail is mournful yet almost musical, a lament that echoes through the valleys like a song half-remembered. Locals whisper of her appearing near ancient ring forts or lonely streams, her presence more sorrowful than sinister. Some even claim she carries a silver comb, running it through her hair as she sings, a detail that ties her to the fairy folk who are said to prize such objects. But cross into the rugged terrain of Ulster, and the banshee sheds her beauty like a discarded veil. Here, she's a hunched, skeletal figure, her long nails ragged, her eyes sunken and glowing. Her cry isn't a song, it's a raw, scraping shriek that claws at the ears. In Donegal, they speak of the Bean Caointe, the keening woman, whose wails are so piercing they've been mistaken for the wind howling through the cliffs. She doesn't just predict death, she embodies it, her tattered shroud flapping like a funeral banner. The difference isn't just cosmetic. In Munster, her role feels almost ceremonial, a respectful nod to the dying. In Ulster, she's a force of pure dread, a reminder that death isn't always gentle. Delve into Connacht, and the banshee takes on yet another guise, the Badb, named after the crow-like war goddess. Here, she's often seen as a shapeshifter, flickering between a stooped old woman and a great black bird, her screeches mingling with the cries of ravens. In Mayo, locals once spoke of hearing her voice rise from bogs at dusk, a guttural croaking that sent livestock stampeding. Meanwhile, in Leinster, she's sometimes called the Far Liath, the Grey Watcher, a silent figure who appears at crossroads, her gaze alone enough to freeze the blood. These regional variations aren't accidents. They reflect the land itself, Munster's lush valleys inspiring a more poetic spirit, Ulster's harsh cliffs birthing a darker icon. Even the names change. Keenead in the south, where keening rituals were most elaborate, Badb in the west, where the old gods lingered longest. But beneath the differences lies a shared truth. The Banshee is never just a ghost. She's a mirror reflecting the fears, the history, even the very soil of the places she haunts. So the next time you hear a strange cry in the night, remember, it might not just be the wind, it might be the land itself speaking in a voice as old as the hills. Crossing the sea from Ireland to Scotland, the Banshee's kin takes on a new form. The Bean Nighe, the washerwoman at the ford. Picture this, a lonely stream at dusk where a hunched figure kneels in the shallows, scrubbing blood from a tattered shroud. Her red-webbed fingers wring the fabric with eerie precision, her mournful humming the only sound over the rushing water. This isn't just laundry, it's a grim prophecy. Every stitch she cleans belongs to someone marked for death. While the Irish banshee announces fate with her voice, the Bean Nighe works with her hands, her very labor a visible omen of what's to come. The contrasts are striking. Unlike the banshee, who often appears as an ethereal figure, the Bean Nighe is grounded in grisly physicality. She's described as small and grotesque, with a single nostril, protruding teeth, and long, dangling breasts, traits that tie her to Scotland's older, wilder folklore. Yet both spirits share a core purpose. They're messengers of mortality. The banshee wails, the Bean Nighe washes. One speaks death, the other shows it. But here's where their stories twist. Encountering the Bean Nighe isn't always a passive experience. Legends say if you sneak up and seize her breast, she'll grant you a wish or reveal secrets of the future. It's a rare moment of bargaining with the supernatural, a thread of hope spun into her dread-filled role. Location matters too. Banshees haunt hills and empty houses, their voices carried by the wind. The nighe is bound to water streams, fords, riverbanks, places where the veil between worlds is thin. Water, in Celtic tradition, is a conduit for the other world, and her presence there underscores her role as a bridge between realms. She doesn't just predict death, she prepares for it, cleansing the garments the doomed will wear in their next life. It's a chilling blend of practicality and prophecy, as if death itself requires tidy linen. Yet for all their differences, these spirits share a haunting duality. The banshee mourns, the nighe labors. Both are feared, yet both fulfill a sacred function, guiding the living to acknowledge death's approach. In Scotland, her presence was sometimes met with a grim pragmatism. If a traveler spotted her at dusk, they might whisper a prayer and hurry home, knowing someone's time was near, but also recognizing she wasn't evil, just inevitable. That's perhaps the most profound parallel. Neither spirit exists to terrify, but to bear witness. Whether through a scream or a scrubbed cloth, they remind us that death has always been a part of life, as natural as water flowing, as certain as dawn after dark. Wales has its own spectral herald of doom, the Gaelic ribbon, a figure far more grotesque than her Irish cousin. Picture a creature with stringy black hair clinging to a shriveled face, her leathery wings tattered like a bat's, her voice rasping curses instead of mournful wails. Where the banshee might appear at a nobleman's window, the Gaelic lurks in damp hollows and fog-choked marshes, her name literally meaning hag of the mist. She doesn't just predict death, she seems to relish it, calling out the doomed person's name in a guttural shriek, her clawed hands clutching the air as if already digging a grave. Unlike the banshee's sorrow, the Gaelic's presence drips with malice, a reflection, perhaps, of Wales's rugged terrain and the harsh realities of life clinging to its rain-lashed hills. But look beyond Ireland and Wales, and the Celtic world reveals even more variations. In Brittany, the Ankou rides a creaking cart piled with corpses, his hollow eyes scanning for souls to collect. He's less a spirit than a skeletal ferryman, his arrival signaled by the groan of unoiled wheels in the dead of night. Cornwall whispers of the Duffy, a white-clad woman who glides through coastal villages, her silence more terrifying than any wail. These aren't just regional quirks, they're adaptations to landscape and history. Where Ireland's banshee is tied to family, the Gaelic ribbon embodies the isolation of Welsh valleys. Where Scotland's nighe labours by water, the Ankou navigates Brittany's narrow lanes, his cart a relic of rural poverty. Even lesser-known regions add layers to this tapestry. The Isle of Man's Caelog ny Gromag appears as a hunched old woman who controls the weather with her moods, her storms often preceding deaths at sea. In Galicia, the Santa Campagna marches as a procession of ghosts carrying candles, their footsteps silent but their presence thick with the scent of damp earth. What unites them all is geography's invisible hand. Coastal cultures spawn death omens tied to water, mountainous regions breed solitary hags, places with dense forests conjure phantom processions. The land doesn't just host these legends, it shapes them, whispering its contours into every wail, every shadow, every chilling encounter. The banshee may be Celtic folklore's most famous death spirit, but her cousins prove something profound, how cultures mold the unknown to fit their world. A misty valley needs a different kind of ghost than a windswept cliff, and when night falls and the air grows still, the spirit that comes calling will always wear the face of the land itself. The first written whispers of banshee-like figures creep from medieval manuscripts, pages where Christian monks, quills in hand, transcribed older oral traditions, their ink blurring the lines between pagan belief and church doctrine. One of the earliest glimpses appears in the Liber Gabála Érenn, the Book of Invasions, compiled around the 14th century. This sprawling text stitches together Ireland's mythical history, and nestled among its tales of gods and conquests are women whose wails foretell doom. They're not yet called banshees, but their echoes are unmistakable. Take the Morrigan, her crow's cry chilling warriors before battle, or the trio of sisters who keen for the dying hero Cu Chulainn, their mourning so intense it cracks stones. These figures aren't mere ghosts, they're remnants of a worldview where death had voices and spirits walked alongside the living. Christian scribes tasked with preserving these stories faced a dilemma. How could they reconcile pagan omens with their faith's teachings? Their solution was subtle but profound. They recast the banshees' ancestors as fallen angels, lingering between heaven and hell, or as souls condemned to wander for ancient sins. In the Acalam na Senorach, a 13th century text, otherworldly women appear to saints, their prophecies framed as divine warnings rather than fairy whispers. The banshee's cry, once a thread to the Tuatha Dé Danann, became a cautionary note, a reminder of mortality in a world now governed by Christian judgment. Yet even as the monks reframed the lore, they couldn't strip it of its primal power. The older magic seeped through, clinging to the margins of the page. Compare these accounts to later folklore and a pattern emerges. The banshee's ties to noble families, so prominent in oral tradition, are almost absent in early manuscripts. Instead, she's a more chaotic force, wailing for warriors and kings, her allegiance to bloodlines not yet solidified. This suggests her role evolved over centuries, shifting from a herald of dramatic, communal loss to a more intimate mourner, a change that might reflect societal shifts as clans rose and fell. What the monks preserved wasn't a static legend but a snapshot of a myth in motion, caught between its pagan roots and a world slowly bending to the cross. The Annals of the Four Masters, a 17th century compilation of older records, offers another clue. Here, banshee-like omens precede the deaths of historical figures, their cries recorded with the same gravity as battles or plagues. One entry describes a woman of the Shire seen washing armor in a river before a chieftain's murder, a clear cousin to Scotland's nighe. These weren't fairy tales to medieval chroniclers, they were real events woven into the fabric of history. That's the banshee's paradox. She existed in two worlds at once, her voice echoing through both parchment and peasant memory, neither fully pagan nor entirely Christian, but something liminal, persistent, and undeniably alive. Look closely at these manuscripts and you'll notice something striking. The banshee is never illustrated. Her form is left to the reader's imagination, her presence conjured through words alone. Perhaps the monks feared giving shape to something so inherently wild, or perhaps they understood that her power lay in the unseen, in the way a sudden wail in the dark defies description, lingering long after the sound fades, as ink lingers on vellum, stubborn and indelible. When British rule tightened its grip on Ireland, something strange happened to the banshee. The colonizers brought more than soldiers and laws. They brought a fascination with the exotic folklore of the conquered land. English writers, both enamored and unsettled by Irish superstitions, began reframing the banshee to fit their own Gothic tastes. Suddenly, she wasn't just a mourner, she became a macabre spectacle, a symbol of Ireland itself, wild, sorrowful, and hauntingly beautiful. The very word banshee entered the English language in the 1700s, stripped of its original context, repackaged as a thrilling ghost story for foreign audiences sipping tea in London parlours. Take William Butler Yeats, the poet who wove Irish myth into his work like spells. In his hands, the banshee became less a family spirit and more a literary device, a shimmering, tragic figure floating through his verses. His poem, The Hosting of the Shire, paints her as a fairy queen, her long dim hair streaming as she rides the night wind, romantic, absolutely accurate. Not quite. Yeats and his contemporaries cherry-picked details, smoothing the banshee's rough edges to suit Victorian sensibilities. Gone was the hag of Ulster folklore. In her place stood a melancholy beauty, a muse for poets rather than a feared omen. This wasn't preservation, it was reinvention. The Gothic horror movement twisted her further. English authors like Sheridan Le Fanu, himself Irish but writing for British audiences, drenched the banshee in melodrama. In the house by the churchyard, her wails echo through crumbling estates, less a cultural touchstone than a cheap thrill. The real tragedy, these versions seeped back into Ireland, blurring the line between authentic tradition and colonial fiction. Oral tales passed down for generations now competed with nighe, mass-printed pages where the banshee was just another monster in a catalogue of horrors. Yet resistance simmered beneath the surface. Irish scholars like Douglas Hyde fought to reclaim the banshee's roots, documenting keening rituals and regional variations in works like Beside the Fire. Here, she wasn't a Gothic prop but a living thread in the fabric of Irish identity. Even today, the tension lingers. Is the banshee a tourist trinket, a literary trope, or a whisper from the Shia that no empire could ever fully silence? The answer, like her cry, seems to shift on the wind. To understand the banshee's place in Gaelic society, we must step into a world where death wasn't hidden away but met head-on, with rituals as visceral as life itself. The banshee wasn't just a ghost story, she was a mirror held up to the community's deepest fears and beliefs. Her wail served as a psychological anchor, a way to process the inevitability of loss in a culture where mortality was a constant companion. In an era before hospitals and hospice care, death often arrived suddenly: plagues, battles, childbirth leaving little time to prepare. The banshee's cry offered a kind of grim forewarning, allowing families to brace for grief before it struck. Imagine a mother hearing that unearthly keen in the night and instinctively gathering her children close, already mourning a husband not yet lost to the next day's fishing accident. The sound, however terrifying, created a space for emotional readiness, a buffer against the shock of death's randomness, but her role ran deeper than mere preparation. The banshee was intertwined with keening, the traditional Gaelic mourning practice where women would gather to wail over the dead, their voices rising in a chorus of raw, unfiltered grief. These weren't silent funerals, they were loud, messy affairs where sorrow was given sound and shape. The banshee's cry echoed this ritual as if she were the first keener, the one who started the song the living would later finish. In some tales, her wail even taught the mourners their melody, guiding them in how to grieve. This wasn't just superstition, it was social glue, a way for communities to process collective loss. When the banshee sang, everyone listened, and in that listening, they remembered how to mourn together. Yet the banshee also carried a moral weight. Her appearance wasn't just about death, it was about how one lived. Stories abound of her wailing loudest for those who'd strayed from honor, cheats, oath breakers, those who'd harmed their kin. In this light, she became a spectral enforcer of Gaelic values, her voice a reminder that actions had consequences even beyond the grave. Some legends even claim she'd withhold her cry for the truly wicked, leaving them to face death without the solace of her lament, a fate worse than the dying itself. And then there's the clan connection. In a society where family name meant everything, the banshee was a bizarre badge of pride. To have one signaled that your lineage was old enough, important enough, to warrant a supernatural mourner. It's no coincidence that the families with banshees were often those claiming descent from the Tuatha Dé Danann or ancient kings. Her presence was a living, well, not living, testament to a dynasty's endurance. Even in ruin, these houses were still watched over, their deaths still marked by the otherworld. That's why the banshee persisted in oral histories long after the clans faded. She wasn't just a ghost. She was identity crystallized into sound, a reminder that some bonds outlast even mortality. So the next time you hear a gust howl like a woman's cry, think beyond the fear. What you're hearing isn't just a ghost story. It's the echo of a culture that refused to let death be silent, that gave grief a voice, and that believed even in the darkest moments, no one should have to die unheard. One of the most chilling recorded encounters comes from County Limerick in 1801, when servants at the grand estate of the Fitzgerald family swore they heard an unearthly wailing for 3 consecutive nights, a sound like a woman's scream stretched thin over the wind. On the 4th morning, the eldest son was found dead in his bed, his face eerily peaceful. The family's butler later wrote in his diary that the sound had been neither human nor animal, but something that seemed to leak through the walls themselves. Skeptics might dismiss it as collective hysteria, but the detail of multiple witnesses, stable hands, a cook, even a visiting priest, all describing the same unnatural pitch lends it unsettling weight. Jump forward to 1839, when a British soldier stationed in Cork documented a similar incident in his regiment's logbook. The entry, penned in hurried script, describes a female spectre in tattered grey, gliding past the barracks moments before a messenger arrived with news of an officer's sudden death back in England. What's curious is how the soldier, a man trained in rationality, struggled to reconcile the sight. "I'd sooner believe my eyes deceived me than admit to ghosts," he wrote, yet Jenkins swore he saw her too, clear as daylight, though no woman could have crossed the grounds unseen. These accounts share a pattern. The banshee appears not to the dying, but to those left behind, as if her role is to prepare the living for loss. Then there's the baffling case of the O'Reilly Banshee in 1867. Newspapers from Cavan recount how an entire village heard the wail hours before a fire consumed the local gentry's manor, claiming 8 lives. The sound was so distinct that survivors could pinpoint its origin, a lone hawthorn tree long considered fairy-touched. What chills the spine isn't just the prediction, but the precision. Every victim was of O'Reilly blood. A detailed folklore insists banshees never get wrong. Modern parapsychologists might argue mass suggestion or infrasound frequencies too low for human ears that can induce dread. But how does science explain the hawthorn, which villagers swore had no birds nesting in it for decades before or after that night? Not all historical sightings are so grim. In 1892, a Donegal midwife's journal describes a lovely, silver-haired woman singing outside a cottage where a child battled fever. The next morning, the girl sat up healed, her skin cool. The midwife attributed it to the banshee's kinder side, stories seldom told, of spirits who keen not just for death but for miraculous turns of fate. This duality forces us to ask, are we shaping the banshee to fit our fears, or is she far more complex than our legends allow? The challenge with these accounts isn't just their age but their cultural lens. To the Irish peasant recording a wail in his almanac, the banshee was as real as rain. To the Victorian anthropologist scribbling notes, she was a quaint superstition. Yet dismissing them outright feels arrogant. When identical details, the grey robes, the hair like moonlit water, crop up across centuries in villages with no shared newspapers or telegraphs, coincidence strains credibility. Maybe the truth lies between, not in proving whether spirits exist, but in understanding why certain echoes haunt us all, whispering the same fears across generations. After all, in a world without answers, sometimes a wail in the dark is the only warning we get. To understand the banshee's place in the supernatural tapestry of Celtic lore, we must step beyond her solitary wail and into the crowded world of spirits that share her realm. She isn't alone in haunting the misty hills. She's part of an intricate hierarchy, a spectral ecosystem teeming with fairies, ghosts, and darker entities, each with their own roles and rules. Think of it like a ghostly court. The banshee isn't the queen, but she's no mere servant either. Her voice carries a unique authority, one that even the capricious fairies might pause to heed. Take the owls-she, the fairy folk who dwell in the hollow hills. These beings are ancient, powerful, and often indifferent to human woes unless crossed. The banshee shares their otherworldly origins, but where fairies might steal children or curse crops for slights, her focus is narrow and precise. She doesn't meddle in mortal affairs unless death is near, and even then, she's a messenger, not an instigator. Compare her to the puka, a shape-shifting trickster who might lead travelers astray for amusement or spite. The puka thrives on chaos. The banshee operates with eerie solemnity, her wail a duty, not a game. Then there's the Dullahan, Ireland's headless horseman, a far more brutal herald of doom. While the banshee mourns, the Dullahan enacts death, his whip made from a human spine, his carriage draped in funeral cloth. His arrival doesn't warn, it seals fate. The banshee, by contrast, offers no violence, only sorrow. It's a critical distinction. She exists in the in-between, a liminal figure who observes rather than intervenes. Even among ghosts, she stands apart. Restless spirits might haunt over unfinished business, trapped by grief or vengeance. The banshee isn't trapped, she chooses to appear, bound by some older, deeper contract between worlds. Demons, too, lurk in Celtic lore, but the banshee shares none of their malice. Entities like the Fear Gorta, the Man of Hunger, roam famine-scarred lands, their touch bringing starvation. They're predators feeding on suffering. The banshee doesn't feed, she bears witness. Her power isn't in inflicting pain, but in acknowledging it, a subtlety that places her closer to the realm of the divine than the damned. What emerges is a spectrum. At one end, the fairies, mercurial and wild; at the other, demons, pure in their cruelty. The banshee occupies a middle ground, her role too solemn for mischief, too compassionate for horror. Even the Morrigan, the battle goddess whose crow shrieks mirror the banshee's wail, is more actively involved in shaping fate. The banshee merely whispers it. That's her true place in the hierarchy, not a ruler, not a pawn, but a sacred witness, her voice the thread stitching the mortal world to whatever lies beyond. So the next time you hear a faint cry on the wind, remember, it's not just a ghost story. It's one voice in a chorus of spirits, each with their own part to play in the endless dance between the living and the unseen. The banshee's identity as a woman isn't accidental, it's a reflection of deep-seated cultural beliefs about gender, death, and the natural world. Across countless traditions, from Ireland to Greece to Japan, female spirits dominate the realm of omens and portents. But why? The answer lies in the roles women have historically played in the theater of mortality. In ancient Celtic societies, mourning wasn't a passive act, it was a ritual performance, and women were its primary conductors. Known as keeners, these mourners would lead the community in wailing, singing, and even composing poetic laments for the dead. Their voices were the soundtrack of loss, raw and unfiltered, channeling grief into something tangible. The banshee's wail mirrors this tradition exactly. She's the supernatural embodiment of the keener's art, her cry an extension of the very real women who once guided souls through the threshold of death with their songs. This connection runs deeper than mere ritual. In many cultures, women were seen as closer to the mysteries of life and death, not just as mourners, but as midwives, healers, and caretakers of the dying. They witnessed the bookends of existence firsthand, ushering souls in and out of the world. The banshee's role as a herald aligns perfectly with this duality. She doesn't cause death, she marks its arrival, much like a midwife announces a birth. There's a profound symmetry here. If women were the guardians of life's beginnings, it made symbolic sense for them to also preside over its endings. Yet not all female death omens are gentle guides. The banshee's uglier incarnations, the hags with hollow eyes, the screeching crones, reveal another layer of societal fear. Throughout folklore, aged or grotesque women often symbolize nature's uncontrollable, destructive side. Think of the Slavic Baba Yaga or the Greek Furies, figures who embody chaos, decay, and the untamed forces that defy human order. The banshee's hag-like forms tap into this archetype, framing death not as a dignified transition but as something wild, inevitable, and terrifying. Her appearance serves as a reminder that mortality isn't tidy or kind. It's a force as raw and untamed as the storm-racked cliffs of the Irish coast. This duality, mourner and monster, speaks volumes about how societies have historically viewed femininity itself. Women could be nurturers, their voices soothing the dying, or they could be harbingers of chaos, their wails upending the natural order. The Banshee embodies both, her shifting forms reflecting humanity's ambivalence toward the power of the feminine. Even the tools associated with her, the silver comb, the blood-stained shroud, carried gendered symbolism. Combs link her to domesticity and vanity, while shrouds tie her to the labor of preparing bodies, work traditionally done by women. Every detail reinforces her role as a liminal figure, straddling the line between caretaker and omen, between the sacred and the grotesque. Modern interpretations add another twist. Some scholars argue the Banshee's femininity critiques patriarchal fears of female agency. Her voice, loud and unavoidable, disrupts the silence expected of women in many historical contexts. She can't be ignored or silenced. Her wail pierces through the night, demanding acknowledgement. In this light, she becomes a subversive figure, a spectral rebellion against the idea that women should be seen and not heard. Whether as a mourner, a monster, or something in between, the Banshee's gender isn't just a detail, it's the core of her power. She forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that death, like the women who have long been its witnesses, refuses to be tamed. While banshees primarily existed as omens rather than targets in folklore, history reveals chilling moments when their legend bled into the paranoia of witch trials. In 1623, an elderly Irish healer named nighe was dragged before a local magistrate, accused of summoning the banshee's cry to curse a landlord's family. Witnesses claimed her mourning songs too closely mirrored the banshee's wail, a detail that sealed her fate. What made these accusations so volatile wasn't just superstition, it was the banshee's symbolism. A woman who operated beyond male authority, whose voice carried supernatural weight, became a threat in societies where female autonomy was itself suspect. The connection wasn't coincidental. Banshees, like accused witches, often embodied traits that unsettled patriarchal norms: untamed grief, unchecked movement through the night, and a refusal to be silenced. In Scotland's witch panic of 1691, a midwife named Elspeth Rioch faced charges after villagers swore she'd been seen conversing with a white-clad woman by the river, a clear nod to the nighe. The trial records reveal the real fear. Elspeth's knowledge of herbs and birth rituals, combined with her alleged spectral ties, framed her as a bridge between worlds, a role that bypassed church and state control. Her case underscores how banshee law could weaponize existing fears of women who defied domestic expectations. Even outside formal trials, banshee associations carried danger. In 1706 Cornwall, a fisherman's widow named Joan Wynne was driven from her village after neighbors blamed her for a banshee's scream that preceded a child's drowning. Never mind that Joan had been miles away. Her reputation as a recluse who collected sea kelp, a practice vaguely linked to fairy traditions, made her a scapegoat for the inexplicable. What's striking in these accounts is the pattern. Women already on society's margins, healers, spinsters, widows, were most vulnerable to having their mundane actions reinterpreted through the lens of banshee mythology. The trials also expose a hypocrisy. While church authorities dismissed banshees as pagan nonsense, they willingly exploited those beliefs when convenient. In Germany's Rhineland, a 1682 pamphlet described a suspected witch's familiar as a wailing spectre with hair like frost, conflating local death omens with demonology. This wasn't just ignorance, it was tactical. Linking real women to banshees gave witch hunters a pre-existing framework of fear, turning folklore into a weapon. The banshee's mournful purpose became twisted, no longer a messenger but a malicious collaborator. Yet some records hint at quiet resistance. In County Mayo, an accused woman named Sile Nighe Hale reportedly leaned into her banshee association during her 1654 trial, warning the judges her keening would follow their families for generations. Whether bluff or defiance, her words unsettled the court enough to commute her sentence to exile. It's a rare glimpse of the banshee's power being reclaimed, if only for a moment, by those it was used to persecute. These trial fragments remind us that folklore is never neutral. It's a battleground where the stories we tell about spirits can shape the fates of the living. Hollywood has a way of reshaping legends until they're almost unrecognizable, and the banshee is no exception. Take Disney's Darby O'Gall and the Little People from 1959, where the banshee is reduced to a green-faced ghoul lunging from the fog, her wail more jump scare than sacred omen. It's a far cry from the solemn mourner of Irish hills, and the film's portrayal set a template for decades of lazy horror tropes, but not all modern takes miss the mark. The TV series Supernatural offered a more nuanced twist. Their banshee retained her ties to ancient bloodlines, her cries still heralding death, but with a detective story edge tracking her victims through genealogical records. It's a clever update, blending folklore with modern obsession with ancestry. Even if the glowing eyes and fangs leaned into spectacle, music too has reclaimed the banshee's voice literally. Irish punk bands like Flogging Molly weave her wails into their songs, the keening becoming a rallying cry for diaspora pride. Meanwhile, composer Christopher Young's score for The Grudge borrowed the banshee's tonal dread, that high, hair-raising shriek echoing through the soundtrack. These adaptations aren't just borrowing a spooky aesthetic, they're tapping into something primal about her sound. The way it bypasses logic and drills straight into the spine. Yet for every respectful homage, there's a leprechaun-style caricature, all shrieking and no substance. Video games like The Witcher 3 at least nod to her origins, naming her the Washer of the Ford, her laundry ritual intact. But the Harry Potter universe's screaming banshee feels like a missed opportunity, a magical creature stripped of cultural weight, her cries just another classroom nuisance. The problem isn't creative license, it's when the banshee becomes a hollow prop, severed from her roots as a guardian of memory and mortality. The best modern interpretations understand her duality. Neil Gaiman's The Sandman comics reimagined her as one of the endless aspects, Death's Irish sister, both playful and profound. Here, she's not just a warning but a witness to the stories we tell about dying. Even horror films like The Banshee Chapter grasped her audio uncanniness, using radio static to mimic her voice, a nod to her liminal nature between worlds. These versions don't dilute the lore, they stretch it, proving her legend is elastic enough to hold new fears. What's fascinating is how pop culture's banshee reflects changing anxieties. Mid-century films made her a monster. Today's stories often frame her as an anti-hero or even a victim. A recent Doctor Who episode cast her as a trapped alien, her wails a distress signal. It's a shift that says more about us than our growing comfort with ambiguity, our hunger for myths that aren't just black and white. The banshee endures because she's more than a ghost. She's a mirror, and every era sees something different in her trembling reflection. Could the banshee's haunting well be nothing more than the cry of a barn owl piercing the night? Scientists have long noted how the owl's screech, a rasping, high-pitched shriek, bears an eerie resemblance to descriptions of the banshee's voice. In the stillness of rural Ireland, where sound carries for miles over open fields, a startled owl could easily be mistaken for something supernatural. The timing adds to the illusion. Owls often call at dusk or dawn, those liminal hours when the veil between worlds feels thinnest and human minds are prone to weaving stories from shadows. One 1938 study from County Galway even documented a spike in banshee sightings near old barns where owls roosted, their nesting seasons coinciding with local flu outbreaks, a cruel overlap that may have linked their cries to rising deaths in the community. But owls aren't the only culprits. The wind itself can play tricks, especially in places like the Burren's limestone valleys or the sea cliffs of Moher, where gusts whistle through fissures, creating tones that mimic human wailing. Acoustics experts call this phenomenon edge tones, where air forced through narrow gaps produces sustained, vowel-like sounds. Recordings from these sites reveal frequencies strikingly similar to a woman's sob, a fact that might explain why certain locations became infamous for banshee activity. Add to this the psychological power of expectation. Tell someone a hill is haunted, and their brain will strain to hear confirmation in every rustle and moan. Then there's auditory pareidolia, the mind's tendency to find patterns in noise, just as we see faces in clouds. In stressful situations, lonely night walks, illness in the household, our brains become hyper-alert, stitching random sounds into coherent, often terrifying narratives. A fox's yelp, a creaking tree branch, even the distant hum of electricity wires can morph into a mourner's dirge under the right conditions. This isn't just speculation. Neurological studies show that grief and fear sharpen our sensitivity to ambiguity, priming us to interpret static as signals. When a family is waiting for a loved one to pass, every nighttime sound becomes a potential omen, a self-fulfilling prophecy woven from dread and hope. Grief hallucinations offer another lens, known as bereavement apparitions. These sensory experiences, hearing a deceased loved one's voice, feeling their touch, are remarkably common across cultures. Psychiatrists attribute them to the brain's struggle to process loss, a fleeting bridge between denial and acceptance. In Ireland, where banshees are tied to specific families, could her wail be a collective manifestation of this grief? Imagine a household keeping vigil over a dying elder. Exhaustion and sorrow blur the line between waking and dreaming until someone swears they hear the family's spectral mourner singing outside the window. The phenomenon even has a clinical cousin, third man syndrome, where individuals in extreme duress, explorers stranded in storms, soldiers in battle report an unseen presence offering comfort or warning. The banshee's cry in this light might be trauma's echo, a trick of the mind under siege by mortality. Yet dismissing banshees as mere misheard owls or stressed neurons feels incomplete. These explanations might account for isolated incidents, but they falter against the consistency of the lore, the same descriptions across centuries, the families who recognize their banshee's voice across generations. Science can name the mechanisms, but it hasn't quieted the stories. Maybe that's because the banshee lives in the space between fact and fear, where the winds howl and the heart's ache meet, and some truths refuse to be pinned down by either lab coats or folklore. After all, when the night fills with a sound that chills your blood, does it really matter whether it's feathers or phantoms making the noise? The shudder it leaves behind is the same. In modern neo-pagan circles, the banshee has undergone a remarkable transformation. From feared omen to revered ancestor, her wail reinterpreted not as a warning but as wisdom. Where horror films reduce her to a screaming specter, contemporary practitioners often honor her as a bridge between worlds, a guide for those seeking deeper connection with their Celtic roots. Druid groups and pagan covens sometimes invoke her during Samhain rituals, not to predict death but to facilitate communication with the departed, her voice seen as a tool for navigating the thinning veil between realms. This spiritual rebranding strips away centuries of colonial fear-mongering, returning her to something closer to her original role, a sacred mediator rather than a monster. The contrast with mainstream horror couldn't be starker. While movies like The Banshee Chapter frame her as a mindless predator, modern pagans emphasize her ties to lineage and legacy. Reconstructionist groups, particularly those focused on Irish traditions, research historical keening practices to inform their rituals, treating the banshee's lament as a form of ancestral speech. Some even create banshee altars, adorned with silver combs, blackthorn branches, and family heirlooms, a far cry from Hollywood's CGI shrieks. This shift reflects a broader pagan ethos. Death isn't an enemy but a teacher, and the banshee, with her intimate knowledge of that threshold, becomes a mentor. Yet tensions linger. Not all pagans agree on how to engage with her. Some hedge witches caution against casual invocation, arguing that her power isn't a costume to be worn for aesthetic, dark goddess trends. Others point to her specificity. Traditionally, she served particular families, not random seekers. A Welsh polytheist group recently sparked debate by offering banshee summoning workshops, with critics calling it cultural commodification. These disagreements reveal a central question. Can a spirit so tied to blood and soil truly be universalized, or does her revival risk diluting what made her potent in the first place? What's undeniable is how her neo-pagan resurgence challenges dominant narratives. In a world obsessed with sanitizing death, the Banshee's raw grief and unflinching honesty feel radical. Where horror tropes demand we cover our ears, modern pagans ask us to listen, to the past, to the dead, to the parts of ourselves that still know how to keen. Whether as ancestor, ally, or awakener, her voice refuses to be silenced, and perhaps that's her real magic, not predicting endings, but reminding us that even the darkest transitions deserve witness and song. The misty hills of Killarney have long been a magnet for tourists, but not just for their postcard-perfect lakes. Visitors flock here with a different quest, to chase the echo of the Banshee's wail. Local tour guides lean into the legend, leading night walks through twisted oak forests where the air hums with the weight of old stories. One particularly notorious spot is the ruins of Ross Castle, where guests swear they've heard a woman sobbing near the water's edge at dusk. The castle's caretakers lean into the lore, hosting Banshee evenings with storytellers reenacting eerie encounters by candlelight. It's not just about scares, it's about connection. For many in the Irish diaspora, these tours offer a tangible thread to the folklore their grandparents whispered about over peat fires. Venture west to Connemara, and the Banshee's presence grows even stronger. Here, the jagged coastline and boglands seem tailor-made for ghost stories. The Clifton Castle ruins lean hard into their reputation, with audio installations piping phantom wails through the hollow halls during night tours. Clever marketing, absolutely, but there's authenticity in the details. The owners tapped local historians to ensure the recordings mirror centuries-old descriptions of the Banshee's cry, blending low moans with those signature, hair-raising high notes. Nearby, the Banshee's Pass hiking trail weaves through terrain dotted with fairy forts, each stop narrated by an app that layers in whispers and keening sounds when triggered by GPS. Some call it gimmicky, but when the fog rolls in off the Atlantic, even skeptics admit the atmosphere churns up something primal. Then there's the darker side of Banshee tourism. At Loftus Hall in Wexford, a mansion infamous for its Devil's Door and spectral nun, the Banshee's been drafted into a full-blown horror experience. Actors in tattered grey gowns lurch from shadowy corners, shrieking at tour groups. Purists grumble that this turns sacred tradition into a carnival act, but the lines to get in suggest audiences crave the thrill. Contrast that with the quiet reverence of County Meath's Brú na Boyne, where Neolithic passage tombs predate Banshee lore by millennia, yet guides still weave her into the narrative. Standing in the tomb's central chamber, they demonstrate how acoustic quirks can distort voices into uncanny wails, linking ancient engineering to the birth of supernatural belief. Small businesses have spun gold from these legends too. A craft shop in Doolin sells Banshee tears, hand-blown glass pendants said to protect travelers. A Connemara distillery markets a gin infused with hawthorn, the Banshee's sacred tree, labeled with a spectral woman's silhouette. Even the tourism boards lean in. Visit Ireland's Mythical Heartland campaign features a Banshee silhouette howling against a moonlit sky. The genius of these ventures lies in their duality. They commodify the myth, yes, but they also keep it alive, seeding curiosity that sends visitors digging deeper into the lore. Critics argue this commercialism dilutes the Banshee's gravity, turning her into a mascot. Yet locals counter that without these trappings, the stories might fade entirely. In Kerry, a pub owner recounts how his grandmother refused to speak of the banshee except in whispers, fearing her power. Now he hosts monthly storytelling nights where her tale unfolds alongside clinking pints and crackling hearts. The old ones wouldn't approve, he laughs, but if we don't make space for her in the modern world, who will remember? It's a tension as old as tourism itself, how to honor tradition while putting food on the table. Perhaps the banshee herself wouldn't mind. After all, she's always adapted to the times, her voice slipping through the cracks of every era, finding new ways to be heard. Among the most fascinating developments is the rise of genealogy banshee tours. Companies like My Irish Roots partner with archivists to trace visitors' ancestry, then craft bespoke itineraries to sites linked to their family's banshee lore. A Canadian woman of O'Connor descent recently shared how her tour culminated at a remote Mayo churchyard where records showed 6 generations of her kin were buried. As dusk fell, the guide played a centuries-old keening chant and swears the wind threw the sound back twice as loud. Coincidence, theatrics, it doesn't matter. In that moment, the legend ceased to be a story and became something felt. That's the real magic of banshee tourism. Not the manufactured scares, but the rare, electric instances where past and present brush against each other, leaving guests with gooseflesh and a hunger to understand more. So whether you're sipping banshee gin under a Connemara sky or jumping at a staged scream in a haunted castle cellar, remember this: behind every gimmick lies a grain of truth, a fragment of a belief system that once shaped how entire communities understood life, death, and the unseen threads between them. The banshee may have been commercialized, but she's far from tamed. Visit these places with open ears, and you might just catch the faintest tremor in the air, a vibration that feels older than the ruins around you. And in that second, before logic rushes back in, you'll wonder if the stories ever really were just stories at all. Death whispers in every culture's ear, but rarely does it sound quite like the banshee. Across the world, spirits and omens mirror her role, yet none capture the same eerie intimacy as Ireland's mourning phantom. Take Mexico's La Llorona, the weeping woman who wanders riverbanks, her grief as endless as the waters that drowned her children. Like the banshee, her wails pierce the night, but where the banshee's cry is a herald, La Llorona's is a punishment, a curse born of mortal sin rather than a sacred duty. Their shared sound, the anguished voice of a woman, reveals a universal truth. Humanity has always given death a feminine face, but the banshee's tie to lineage sets her apart. She doesn't haunt indiscriminately, she serves specific bloodlines, her loyalty as unshakable as the roots of an ancient oak. Then there's Greece's Morrigan, the crow-headed war goddess whose shrieks foretold doom on battlefields. At first glance, she seems a banshee in armor, both spirits who vocalize fate, but the Morrigan doesn't just announce death, she revels in it, her presence stirring chaos like a storm. The banshee, by contrast, stands apart from the violence, her wail steeped in sorrow, not bloodlust. Even their origins diverge. The Morrigan is divinity incarnate, worshipped and feared, while the banshee dwells in the liminal space between fairy and ghost, respected but never prayed to. Venture north to Scandinavia, and you'll meet the Valkyries, choosers of the slain who carry warriors to Valhalla. Like the banshee, they're linked to noble lineages, their appearances marking transitions. But Valkyries are triumphant, their wings sweeping through battle smoke to claim heroes. The banshee doesn't collect, she accompanies, her voice a bridge, not a chariot. It's a subtle distinction that speaks volumes about Celtic values. Death isn't just glory or punishment, it's a passage to be mourned, a communal loss etched into the air itself. Even Japan's Yubium shares threads with the banshee, a spirit of childbirth who died in labor, her ghostly cries heard near temples. Both figures embody the intersection of life and death, their voices roar with unfinished love. But the Yubium's story is personal, tethered to her own tragedy, while the banshee's lament stretches beyond individual pain to something collective, almost ceremonial. That's the Celtic difference. Her grief isn't solitary. It's woven into the fabric of kinship, a reminder that no one dies truly alone. What unites these spirits is their sound, the unbearable humanity of a woman's cry cutting through the dark. But the banshee's uniqueness lies in her precision. She doesn't wail for all, nor does she intervene. She watches, waits, and when the moment comes, she sings the old songs of loss, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. In a world full of death omens, she remains the only one who keens not for vengeance or glory or guilt, but simply because someone somewhere must bear witness. And in that act of witnessing, she becomes something rare, a ghost who doesn't haunt but holds. One of the most persistent myths about the banshee is that her wail brings death, that she's some kind of spectral assassin hunting victims with her voice. But dig into the oldest tales and you'll find something far more nuanced. The banshee doesn't wield death like a weapon, she observes it like a sentinel. Irish folklore is explicit. Her cry is a warning, not a curse. Take the 14th century book of Lismore, where a banshee's lament precedes a chieftain's death in battle. But the text makes it clear she appears because he's fated to fall, not the other way around. This distinction is crucial. She's not a murderer, she's a messenger, her voice tied to the natural order like a bell tolling the hour. Another stubborn misconception paints her as uniformly evil, a shrieking hag straight from a horror flick. Yet regional stories reveal staggering variety. In County Kerry, she's often described as a serene figure in white, her keening more sorrowful than sinister. A 19th century collector in Clare recorded an account of a banshee who hummed lullabies to comfort the dying, her presence described as gentle as mist. Even her more fearsome incarnations, like the red-eyed crones of Ulster lore, aren't inherently malicious. Their ghastly appearances serve a purpose, to mirror the ugliness of grief itself, the raw, unfiltered face of loss that polite society often hides. Then there's the idea that banshees haunt indiscriminately. Not so. Historical records like the Annals of the Four Masters emphasize her ties to specific families, usually those with ancient Gaelic roots. A Welsh traveller's diary from 1682 describes an encounter where a banshee ignored a group of English settlers entirely, her wails reserved for a nearby Irish household. This selectivity wasn't arbitrary. It reflected a cultural belief that certain lineages maintained pacts with the otherworld, their histories so intertwined with the land that even death acknowledged the bond. Perhaps the most damaging myth is that banshees are relics of superstition, their stories meaningless in the modern age. But ask the residents of Doolin, where a local hotelier insists the banshee's cry echoed through the valley the night before a beloved elder passed in 2019. Or the Donegal family who, despite living in Canada for generations, recognized their ancestral banshee's signature three-note wail before a relative's death in 2017. These accounts, however anecdotal, underscore her enduring role, not as a bringer of doom, but as a reminder that death is never truly solitary. She's the last voice some hear, the final thread tethering them to the living, and in that there's a strange, aching comfort. So the next time you hear a ghost story about a screaming banshee, listen closer. The truth is quieter, older, and far more profound. She's not a monster. She's memory made sound, 1,000 years of keening folded into a single, unearthly note. And in a world that so often turns away from death, her refusal to stay silent might be her most sacred duty of all. The banshee's mournful wail has echoed far beyond the misty hills of Ireland, seeping into the world of art and literature with haunting power. James Joyce, that titan of modernist writing, wove her into Finnegan's Wake not as a mere spectre, but as a symbol of cyclical grief and rebirth, her cry blending with the river Liffey's flow, a liquid lament for the ages. Joyce reimagined her as Anna Livia Plorabelle, a shape-shifting figure whose voice carries the weight of Dublin's collective memory. It's a radical twist. The Banshee isn't just a ghost here. She's the city's unconscious, singing the sorrows buried in its cobblestones. This literary alchemy reveals how artists don't just retell folklore, they resurrect it, bending old myths to mirror new anxieties. Painters, too, have been hypnotized by her duality. John Duncan's 1912 masterpiece, The Banshee, captures her as a wraith hovering over a moonlit shore, her tattered robes dissolving into sea foam. But look closer, the strokes are deliberately blurred, as if the canvas itself trembles at her presence. Contemporary illustrator Claire Hummel takes a different tack, reimagining her as a fractured mosaic of light and shadow, each shard reflecting a different regional legend. One moment she's Munster's sorrowful maiden, the next Ulster's hollow-eyed crone. These visual interpretations aren't just decorative, they're dialogues with tradition, wrestling with the question, how do you paint a voice? Poetry bends to her cadence most of all. W.B. Yeats scribbled of her in the wind among the reeds, her cry, a needle-pulling thread slashed through the fabric of the dead. But it's modern spoken word artists like Felly Speaks who have truly electrified her legend, performing Banshee keens as living protest, reclaiming her wail as a sound of resilience against colonial silence. In her Banshee manifesto, the poet doesn't just describe the spirit, she channels her, turning the lament into a rallying cry for cultural survival. It's raw, urgent, and proof that folklore isn't frozen in time, it breathes. Novels have stretched her mythos in startling ways. Pat O'Shea's The Hounds of the Morrigan repositions her as a reluctant ally to child protagonists, her wails redirecting them from danger. Meanwhile, Claire Keegan's Foster subverts expectations entirely. The Banshee here is mute, her presence felt in the gaps between words, the unsaid grief of a motherless girl. Even graphic novels like The Nameless City borrow her aesthetic, giving their own death omens the Banshee's signature silver hair and echoing shrieks. And then there's music, not just the expected folk ballads, but avant-garde compositions like Linda Buckley's The Banshee, where a solo violin scrapes and soars to mimic her otherworldly range. Or consider the indie game Hollow Knight, where her influence seeps into the mourner character, a bug-like creature who sings lost souls into the afterlife. These adaptations prove her legend's elasticity, how a spirit rooted in oral tradition can shape-shift across mediums, always recognizable yet endlessly reinvented. From Joyce's labyrinthine prose to pixelated game design, the Banshee endures because artists recognize what folklore knew all along. Her voice was never just a warning. It's an invitation to listen closer, to grieve louder, and to remember that some stories refuse to stay buried. They rise, wailing through every brushstroke, every stanza, every note that quivers in the dark. From ancient fairy mounds to Hollywood scream queens, the Banshee's journey is a testament to the enduring power of folklore. She began as a whisper in the pre-Christian hills of Ireland, a spectral mourner woven into the fabric of kinship and land. Through centuries of colonization, religious upheaval, and cultural reinvention, her wail never faded, it simply changed key. Medieval monks scribbled her into manuscripts as a fallen angel. Victorian poets recast her as a tragic muse. Hollywood stripped her down to a jump scare, while neo-pagans reclaimed her as a guardian of ancestral memory. Yet no matter the era, her core remains unchanged, a voice that refuses to let death pass in silence. Her evolution mirrors our own shifting relationship with mortality. To the Gaelic clans, she was a sacred witness, her keening a bridge between worlds. To the colonizers who feared her, she became a grotesque caricature, a symbol of the wild Irish otherness they sought to tame. Modern pop culture oscillates between these extremes, sometimes reducing her to a haunted house sound effect, other times honoring her as a complex antihero. Through it all, she endures because her story taps into something universal. The human need to give shape to the unknown, to hear the unseen, to believe that even in our final moments we're not entirely alone. So here's the question that lingers like her echo in the dark. Would you want to hear her wail, to know death is coming with enough time to say goodbye, or to spend your last hours paralyzed by dread? There's no right answer, only the weight of the choice itself. Maybe that's why her legend persists. She's not just a ghost story, she's a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears about control, fate, and the unbearable truth that some things can't be unseen or unheard. Now it's your turn. Have you ever encountered a banshee's cry or something close? Share your stories in the comments, whether they're family folklore, eerie coincidences, or even your own take on her myth. And if you're hungry for more tales where legends and history collide, don't forget to like and subscribe. The past is full of voices waiting to be heard. Who knows, the next one might just be calling your name.